Ooh. Yes. Hello, if you're already here, just give me a second. I'm trying to share the screen. Okay. I'm going to give it a couple of minutes just to make sure there's no stragglers, maybe like 2 minutes, because I'm kind of an impatient person. But then we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome. My name is Paige Shanno. I'm just going to introduce myself while we're waiting for people. I'm an occupational therapist. I joined Kinetic Edge technically in December, but I've been here since September as a student, and then I graduated and joined the practice. Today I'm talking about getting to sleep and staying asleep, which are the main problems with sleep-related concerns these days. In full transparency, I did not follow my own advice and got terrible sleep last night because I had caffeine too late. Because I was trying to finish this presentation and make it look so good for you guys. So I apologize if I start yawning during the presentation. It's because I had caffeine at approximately 8 p.m., which was not smart. I promise I will not be that way with your kiddos. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. So hopefully everyone can get caught up. I did want to let you guys know that there's a slide at the end of this presentation for questions. So I think I can see your questions during the presentation, but if I don't, I will get to them. It'll just be a little bit later. This little comic is not necessarily me in my bed, but anytime I go to another bed, like hotels, those types of things, this was just something I really related to. I was like, I cannot get comfortable in the morning. I just don't want to leave. Our objectives today are going to be talking about why sleep is important, signs of sleep deprivation, keys to falling asleep, keys to staying asleep, and then time for questions. This is my friend Addie's baby, isn't she just precious? So why is sleep important? I'm sure you guys all know why sleep is important, but it's good to do a little review. It's food for our brain. This is when our brain is able to transfer all the things that we learn throughout the day into long-term memory. If we're not getting enough sleep, we're not able to complete those long-term memories, which is why you see school performance drop, or you may feel like your own performance drops when you have sleep deprivation. Many important body functions and brain activity occur during sleep. So this is also a time for your digestion system to take over. Your body kind of recuperates after the day. A lot of important physiological processes occur. And then it's crucial, sleep is crucial to management of being awake and alert. Because sleep and alertness are on opposite sides of the spectrum, when you pull away from sleep, meaning you're getting less sleep, then your awake alertness might shift to your super high alert, or it might come back closer to the middle. And there's not really like a just right alertness that you're able to reach if you're not getting adequate sleep. And this stat's a couple years old, but it says that 69% of American infants, children, and teens are sleep deprived, which I can attest to seeing and also being one of those. We just have a lot of stuff going on. So what does sleep look like emotionally? I'm sure that every single person has had a night when they haven't gotten enough sleep and they notice the next day that they wake up and they're just snippy. They have less patience. You lose it over little things, like maybe the spilled milk doesn't normally bother you, but if your kid spills the milk and then you're just like, that's it, that's the last straw. Changes in routine that typically might not upset you may become more upsetting, and it's harder to calm yourself down. And we'll talk about why in a little bit. Physically, kids become clumsier, they become hyperactive. This really occurs, we'll talk about it a little bit later too, what we call the second wind at bedtime. When we miss our natural sleep window, our body has to wake us back up to make sure that we're awake, for safety purposes, that we're not falling and tripping and that type of stuff. So then we have too much energy and it's hard to wind us down. And that's why you see a lot of kids, we'll have a lot of kids come in and their parents are like, they won't settle down at night. They're just so hyper. And it's most likely because we're missing the natural sleep window. Sometimes sleep deprivation physically looks like being need to be woken up in the morning. This one, I feel I crave carbohydrates and sugars constantly, but definitely when I'm sleep deprived, because they give you a little boost in energy, then you end up crashing later. Even knowing that, I still crave them, but Sometimes education doesn't fix it all. Stomach and headaches are also common, as well as anxiety. So if your child or you are already struggling with some of these things and then you add sleep deprivation to it, it can just compound the problem. What does it look like for attention? This one I think hits me the hardest when I'm sleep deprived. I have a lot harder time focusing and paying attention. I talk excessively anyway, but then if you get me going and I'm really hyper because I'm of lack of sleep, then I just won't stop talking. It's harder to make decisions. It makes your brain work harder with less um, juice to power it. Basically, it's like running on a half empty battery or like a low tank. You're not able to make the decisions or the choices that you normally would if your brain was fully functioning. And then not only that, but you're seeking stimulation to keep you awake. So you might see like a lot of kids will come in who are just so hyperactive, but then we ask about sleep and they're like, oh, yeah, they only sleep for like a couple hours at night and then they get up and then they go back to sleep. The hyperactivity might be solved with being able to sleep consistently because the body's trying to keep itself awake so it can't sustain focus on any one task because it needs new stimulation constantly in order to stay awake. Whoa. Socially, this can be seen as bossy and demanding, feelings getting hurt more easily, difficulties being patient. If they're being told no, they'll have complete meltdowns. It really irritated by others, especially when you get home from school. After school is a hard time anyway, but when they're sleep deprived, it's just easier to irritate them. And then some like nitpicking of rules, or like they try to compromise rules that you may have already established firm boundaries with. They'll start like pushing back on them just because they're sleep deprived. Good sleep is the opposite of all those things that we talked about. So higher GPAs, better math skills, higher reading scores, improved focus and attention, less conflicts, fewer accidents. There's one stat that said, I forgot to mention this in the physical slide, but there's one stat that said if you are sleep deprived, you're 86% more likely to end up in the ER. So if we have good sleep, then we're less likely to be prone to accidents. So maybe clumsiness can be solved with better sleep. Stronger immune systems, fewer cavities, gum disease, lower susceptibility to obesity. I read this study the other day that was saying how we're able to properly break down our food and stress hormones are lower, which is why the lower rates of obesity occur when we have better sleep because we're better able to process everything and manage our stress hormones, which can lead to weight gain. We get asked a lot what the average sleep needs are. I'll let you guys kind of glance over these. Um, the problem becomes most parents are like, well, what if my kid is not getting this recommended amount of time? This isn't a cut and dry, like necessarily you have to meet these recommendations. These are more helpful for parents whose kids are only getting 6 hours of sleep and you need some type of time frame to get to. And it's like the goal setting. This isn't necessarily like the golden rule. You have to meet these sleep hours. These are just important for like when we're looking at extreme sleep deprivation, where can we get to? Um, Unfortunately, teens and adults only get an average of 6 to 7 hours per night when it's recommended that we get 8 to 0.25 hours. I know that when I started making sleep a priority for me in college, I performed way better, even though I still feel tired most of the time. Um, I performed better because I was able to focus and concentrate, and I was able to do things with less motivation. So, how did we get here? These are the main things that researchers have found have really led to decreased sleep levels and difficulties with sleep. Unfortunately, and we probably all hear about it, it's a hot topic, but hot topic button. Hot is that what it's called? You guys know me. The technology and like TV screen times really does change the way that our brain works, and it leads to shorter attention spans. It leads to circadian rhythm imbalances, and it keeps our brains awake longer. Um, Kids are more likely to or less likely to play with toys when the TV is on, so that leads to developmental skills that are being lost. There's just a lot of like negative correlations with technology and the increased stimulation that comes from that. Schedules having to be schedules moved around for adult availability. What we mean by this is um, preschool and like toddler activities are no longer during the day as much, and like grade school kids activities are later in the evening because we have to push back for adult work hours. So we're seeing games as late as like 8 or 9 p.m. when kids' bedtimes are around 8 and 9 p.m. And if we're keeping them awake for longer, then that's just going to throw off their schedule and routine. Um, I mean, I get it because we all work. I know I work late hours, so I can't imagine having to get off of work and go straight to a game of some sort, but it is something to take into consideration. Multiple living situations is also a reason. If we're not in a consistent sleep routine, it can throw us off. Like, think about when you go on vacation or you're staying the night at the grandma and grandpa's or something like that, how it takes you a little bit longer to fall asleep at night. And if you're having to go between multiple houses, how it might shift your sleep routine. And this might occur even if it happens like once a month or something like that. Environmental noise. We just live in a busier society. Even here in Pella, Iowa, it's a little bit noisy depending on where you are. But a lot of times the stimulation from the environment around us can affect our sleep levels. The exposure to violence, research has also shown that with increased violence, it decreased sleep, which is really interesting. So something to keep in mind is like monitoring how much violent media that your child is presented, whether it's in movies or video games, even around other kids, with the language sometimes. It just increases stress levels, like simply that's the response that our body has. It increases stress levels and makes us harder to fall asleep. And then lastly, is achievement and needs. So like the competition, the drive to do better, keeps us awake longer, gets us, or doesn't keep us asleep as much because we're so worried about achieving things and competing against others. And so that interrupts our sleep. So what are the culprits of these things that are interrupting our sleep? So we have three culprits: tension, time, temperament, or sensory preferences. As OTs, we look at all of these, but we specialize in the sensory preference realm. So that one I'm not going to go into huge detail on because it's honestly, it could be its own slideshow, could be its own 4-hour long lecture, because there's so much research behind it. But we'll touch on it a little bit today. So tension is regarding the ability to be calm enough to go to sleep. Does our body feel safe? Do we have too high of stress levels? Is the cortisol too high? Time is the body's clock. So our circadian rhythm does our body know when it's time to shut down? Are we getting inconsistent cues so we're unable to shut our body down? And then temperament is, it might mean that we need assistance to calm down because we're unable to regulate ourselves in the way that we are right now. We might need help to get there. So tension, some common triggers for distress and excitement. So this is talking about distressful and excitement tension. It doesn't necessarily always have to be distressful. There can be tension or stress over exciting things too. So parents being stressed. This study I was reading about, I think it was saliva intake. Yeah, saliva samples from preschoolers um, had higher levels of stress when their parents were stressed. So even kids as young as like preschool and younger, they can feel the effects of your stress, which is kind of blessing and a curse because you feel bad for stressing them out. But also it's a good indicator that you can stop and take care of yourself too. It's a good reminder that you're important, your mental health is important, and it's not just all about your kiddos. Separations, whether this be for like military leave or a spouse travels a lot for work, these things all affect a kid's ability to fall asleep. Upsetting events and major life changes, like maybe moving schools or bullying, things like that. Maybe a loved one passes away or a pet passes away, moving, things like that. They can all lead to lack of sleep. And then unfortunately, the last one, lack of sleep, can lead to, you guessed it, more lack of sleep. It's a cyclical cycle. It's a cyclical cycle. That was redundant. So if we have lack of sleep, then our body is less likely to fall asleep. And then it just creates a cycle where we're not ever getting enough sleep. Common triggers for excitement include overstimulation and scheduling, which I touched on earlier. Our bodies just aren't able to calm down. If you're feeling the effects of overscheduling and you're constantly going from place to place, then you could probably bet that your child is also feeling the effects of going from place to place. If we're just moving from one activity to another, our body is staying in this high state of arousal without giving it the time to come back down. And that can take a toll over the day if we're constantly riding this high state of arousal and never able to just regulate in the middle. Anticipation. I don't know about you guys, but I could never sleep on Christmas Eve because I was so excited for Santa. So I get it. The anticipation for things, even just like normal day activities that they might be excited about, can lead to lack of sleep. Growth spurts. Research shows that the 3 weeks leading up to and after developmental milestones, um, like monthly milestones, that leads to like less sleep because your body is like growing, literally growing. So it needs to like take more energy and it wakes you up a little bit. So we have some suggestions about that later in the PowerPoint. And then again, competition or pressure to perform. So nest. Why is the nest important? This isn't, so if we're talking about tension being related to how safe we feel, the nest is important to giving us that comfort and safety. So this first picture is me in college. And this is when I started tucking a blanket underneath my arm, but I decided that I also need pillows and things touching me because that's what makes me feel safe. That's what makes me go to sleep faster. This is our Coda's child, Beckett, and he needs a bunch of stuffed animals and soft, fuzzy things around him in order to feel comfortable. And then here's my dog. He only really sleeps super well when he's in this really fluffy bed. So here's a couple examples of just how important it is for your child to feel safe. Sometimes we suggest go ahead and get in your kid's bed if you can. I mean, if they're a crib, you probably can't get into it. But if it's a bed, lay down, look, see how comfortable you feel. Is the mattress comfortable? Is it cold, hot? What are the noises? Do you see any shadows? See how comfortable you are, and then maybe ask your kid, like, what do you like about your bed? What do you think you would be more helpful about your bed? So some other ways of easing tension besides building that nest is to name the tension. I think we oftentimes overlook how simple this solution is, but giving a name to what we're feeling is so powerful. So if we're able to help kids name feeling wired or feeling stressed, having sometimes it's saying bubbles in your tummy, we're too excited, we're restless, we're humming with energy, those types of words, and talking about it and saying things like, I notice you're kind of bubbly today. How you're looking very restless. Giving those ideas, those cues to the kids is really helpful. And then they start to pick up on it and use that language themselves. And eventually, once you start using that language consistently, you can start implementing strategies to help with that. You might have to start with a co-strategy, so you're doing it with them. And then over time, they should be able to take over that strategy themselves. And then easing the tension, we already talked about it. It's the schedule. I know that everyone wants to give their kids the best opportunities and the most opportunities. And that's awesome because kids do need those experiences. I would just caution you to really look at it and say, what are the super important things we need to do in this season of life? Could we wait and play a sport maybe in the fall and not in both fall and spring? Something like that. So we can just give these kids some time to decompress. We're already in a very overstimulating world. And if we're constantly bombarding them with activities, they're never going to be able to shut themselves down. And that's why we see lots of kids with hyperactivity in clinic nowadays. And then I think we also overlook the simplicity of a calm touch. Our skin has neurotactile receptors underneath it that respond well to touch. If your kid doesn't like touch, that's a sensory problem, and that's something that we can work on. But if the typical, we would say like neurotypical kiddos who like touch, this is a great way to calm them down. Just massages before bed, giving their body an opportunity to release those endorphins to the brain and give them time to decompress, get those cortisol levels down. Okay, number 2, time. So here's some things that innocently disrupt the body clock. When I read this stuff for the first time, I felt very like convicted. I was like, I do these things a lot, and no wonder I'm so always tired. So kids who typically take naps and you skip a nap, that can upset the body clock. Naps that are after 3 p.m., adolescents who nap longer than 45 minutes, 20 to 30-minute naps, so like short naps for infants or toddlers. This is the one that got me because lots of times on the weekends you want to sleep in, right? Because that's your time to sleep in. But more than a 30 to 60-minute difference in between your wake times, your going to sleep times, which is also a problem, and your meal times can be an innocent trigger to upsetting your body clock, which is kind of a hard pill to swallow because that means you got to be really consistent. And then we talked about it already, but more than 60 minutes of screen time, having electronics in the bedroom or at night, exercising in the evening. A lot of times parents are like, well, I'll just give them exercises to do to kind of burn off their energy. But exercising increases our body temperature. And when we're going to sleep, we want our body temperature to decrease. So if we increase it right before bed, then we're telling our body clock, oh, wait, stay awake longer instead of it's time to cool down, it's time to come down. Exercise is very important for setting our body clock, but it depends on when we do it. And then I mentioned it earlier, something that I am always guilty of is having caffeine. Caffeine after noon is relatively thought of as the standard. But some kiddos, like even like that little amount of caffeine in like those small pops is enough to disrupt the body clock. And if you think about it, in a 7-day time, a shift in schedule of only 1 or 2 nights is a week is disrupting 29% of your sleep. So it's important that each night that we get as much sleep as we can. A good night's sleep starts in the morning. So are you having to go to their room several times in the morning to wake them up? Are you guys running behind? Do we start the day in a high tension zone? Do we constantly move from thing to thing because kids aren't listening or not paying attention to what we're saying? These types of things, all starting our day off a little bit tense, can lead to problems later in the evening. Getting exposed to light within the 15 minutes of our day has been shown to improve our circadian rhythm because it cues the body that it's time to wake up. We live in Iowa, so is it consistently going to give us sunny days within the 15 minutes of waking up? Probably not. But on the days that we do have that, it is important to take advantage of it and just go soak in the sun. And if you're worried about like, well, what are we going to do? If maybe it's like cold outside, we can't go outside and look at the sun. Some things that you could do are like look at clouds, maybe try to find things in the clouds if there are any. Talk about the sunset and the color, or the sunrise and the colors that you see. And it is okay to wake up your kids if you're trying to keep them on schedule. I think a lot of times it's hard because we want them to get as much sleep as we can. But like we talked about, things that innocently disrupt the body clock, if we're not keeping it to within 30 to 60 minutes, in the end, it's not going to help them. So it is okay to wake them up. And then in the morning, are they getting enough nutrition? Are they getting their nutritional needs met? Getting enough protein to sustain them throughout the day? I know we all get a little hangry if we don't get our food. So that's just something to keep in mind, that we want to be able to sit down and have them properly digest their food so that it's fueling them for the day. Do you have a wake up routine? Is it something that your child knows really well and is able to implement and do when no matter where they are? Those are all important things to think about. So it all comes down to consistency when we're thinking about the body clock and how we can help it out. It's routine, routine, routine. And I'll say it throughout this PowerPoint several times because that's how important it is. Establishing a regular wake time, nap time, bedtime, meal time, keeping it as consistent as possible is going to be the best thing for a child who is struggling with sleep. Now, you may have kids that are really good and they can fluctuate throughout the day. We all have different amounts of sleep that we can and cannot tolerate. But for kiddos who are struggling with sleep, I would really make it an effort to keep things as consistent as possible. For babies, it's usually recommended about 2 to 2.5 hours after they wake up. 2-year-olds, toddlers, about 4 to 5 hours after they wake up. And then, like I said before, getting exposure to the morning light. Can't stress it enough. Limiting screen time, especially if we just can't avoid it, at least 60 minutes before bed, if not 120 minutes, would be a great bar to set for yourself, so that we're helping the body calm down and not getting exposed to that blue light. Exercising at the right time and avoiding caffeine. So this is where OT really comes in. It's the temperament or sensory preferences. Every human is a sensory human. It just depends on how much sensory input we can take or tolerate. And our kids are the same way. And honestly, they probably feel it more because they have a lot of emotions for those little bodies. And we're able to kind of sort out all those things, and we're still helping them sort it out. While at the same time, their world is more overstimulating than ours was when we were growing up. So it's more of a challenge for them than it was for us, because they just have so much going on and coming at them in a small amount of time for their little brains. So we generally think of sensory preference or sensory quadrants. So this is kind of like how we identify as sensory beings. You could be multiple of them, you could be one of them, you could be none of them. Like some people who would be like a sensory processor that does like a good job, you might not have any of these as what we consider like a concern, but I'm a functioning adult for the most part, and I have several of these. I'm a sensory seeker for movement. I'm sensitive to auditory stimuli, and I cannot stand screeching noises or like nails on chalkboard, and I will avoid that sensation or that sound at all costs. So there's just different things that we all have in common as human beings, and we usually identify in one of these four, if not more than one of these quadrants. So when we look at kids, as OTs, we really try to break down what each of these mean and help you figure out what we need to help the kid get to a just right level of regulation, because we're either overstimulated or understimulated. So sometimes for like going to sleep, this looks like, are the sheets soft enough? And honestly, sometimes even as a sensory person myself, I'm like, really, is that big of a deal that your one sock, like the pinky toe ridge, is not lining up correctly? And it is, to them, it is a huge deal because they're so sensitive to that stimulus that they cannot focus on anything else until you fix that. So think about it from a sleep standpoint. Are the sheets soft enough? Do they have a heavy blanket on them? Do they hate heavy blankets and they only want a sheet? Do they not want any blankets at all? Do they have to have stuffed animals? Do they need a sound going on in the background? Is sound absolutely a trigger? Things like that. Those are all important considerations to take into account that honestly we could spend a lot of time going over because there's just a lot of sensory input coming in. Establishing routines. This is what research shows has been an effective way to get your kiddo to go to sleep, by setting these routines. So there's a 4-step process. The first is a transition activity. So this is things like maybe everyone starts picking up. We all go upstairs, we get ready, we do like a get ready song. We put on our pajamas, we brush our teeth, go to the bathroom. Those transition activities that lets the kids know, okay, we're stopping what we were doing for the day and now it's time to get ready to go to bed. Then we move into the calm and connection phase, which this is where it's an opportunity for you to help your child regulate themselves and de-stress. So this is when we would provide a massage. Maybe they're really worried about something and they just want to talk to you about it. Getting those things off their chest. If they're not a talker, maybe they want to write about it or color or draw. Reading a book, doing deep pressure massages. Sometimes kids like the little tickly massages. Those types of things. It provides you an opportunity to really sit down and work through their day with them. And then cues for sleep. So this is a little bit different than the transition activity because this is more like a simple thing like turning off the lights. Maybe you have a diffuser or a sound machine. White noise and brown noise are really popular on social media right now. And if you guys have questions about that, I'd be happy to answer. But those have been a good way for kiddos who wake up to like loud noises easily to have white noise or brown noise on in the background because it kind of covers up the loud noises. Maybe you turn on the fan, turn off the fan, that type of thing. And then lastly, switching to sleep. So this is your chance to say things like, okay, I'm going to leave. I'll come back and check on you in 5 minutes. If your child's not there yet, maybe it's, okay, we're going to close our eyes and I'm going to sit here with you for 5 minutes, that type of thing. We hand this out to a lot of parents. This is our sensory motor planning worksheet. It kind of breaks down how our brain responds to sensory input. So if you look at this little diamond square turn square, there we go. In the bottom right corner, language is the most stimulating input for our bodies. So the more we're giving them auditory language in the evening time, the more alert our brain's going to be. So if you follow the arrows over and down, that's the increased arousal zone. So trying to limit the amount of language that we use is beneficial. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't be talking to your kids because some kids need to be talked to when they're going to bed because they have things they're worried about. But I'm talking about in the cues for sleep, in the calming down portion, and in the switch to sleep to try to decrease the amount of auditory stimulus that you provide. This is also helpful because if you look in the middle 3 columns, the tactile and the 2 vestibulars, these are very organizing for the brain. So if your child kind of seems out of sorts or a little bit all over the place, kind of fidgety, these 3 columns in the middle are going to be great solutions to helping your child calm and organize their brain. And then if you go to the other side of the chart, if you go to the taste and smell side, these are the least arousing. So these are the most calming sensory inputs. So like sweet smells, sucking on straws. That's how we first learn to calm ourselves as babies, is through the act of sucking. So if we're able to provide like a strawed water bottle, or maybe before bed, you have your child drink a protein shake or smoothie, something like that. Um, Protein is great for keeping the child asleep throughout the night because we won't be waking up due to hunger. And then you add in the benefit of sucking through a straw to get those oral muscles working. That really helps to calm a child down. This is a kiddo I used to nanny for, and I've never related to a picture more. It's one of my all-time favorite pictures. She's just lounging. So some other research-based tips are to monitor screen time throughout the day, not just before bed. This is something I found interesting. Baths before bed can actually increase arousal levels. It depends on the kid, of course. Like some kids find it very calming to be in the water, but the same premise as exercise applies here. Baths tend to increase body temperature when we're going to bed, we want to decrease our body temperature. So baths can be very calming, but maybe just an hour or two before bed, as a way to kind of set the stage for the body to start calming down. And honestly, sometimes baths are super arousing to kids because they just get so excited to be in the water and they love bath time. So this might be something that you just avoid in general. Setting concrete boundaries. So this is avoiding vagueness in your instructions. So instead of being like, I'll be back in a couple of minutes, saying things like, I'll be back in 5 minutes, because then they know there's a concrete time and they're not sitting there wondering, is it going to be soon? I hope it's soon. I bet it's going to be soon. I'll just stay awake until she gets here. And they're like, oh, it's only a couple of minutes. I could probably close my eyes and start to fall asleep and she'll be here soon. Saying something like, only one book tonight, because kids who start to do the callbacks, kids who are like, but my animal is not tucked into my arm correctly. And I don't have Mr. Squishy Pants next to my head like it needs to be. So I need to get him right now immediately. And you're like, that's not important, but okay. So setting concrete things like, you can only call me back into your room 2 times tonight, and then I'm not coming back. You may come and get me, but I'm not leaving my bed, type of thing. So that way they have like really distinguished boundaries. Oftentimes you see that if you set those boundaries, kids start to expect it and they don't like have the anxiety of waiting for it. So they sleep better anyway. So oftentimes if you set those boundaries, the sleep improves because they know that they're safe. They know that their parent is there for them, but they don't need to seek out that attention. And then this last bullet point is just for things to be aware of. Like, no one's always going to have perfect sleep. We're always going to have nights when we don't sleep as much. So just being prepared for that can be really beneficial for your mental health and for the health of your child. So like I mentioned before, growth spurts during holidays, because routine is all messed up, as upsetting events, changing in routine. Nap or not to nap. These are Elise's kiddos. Elise is my boss, and they're just so precious. The short answer is it depends. Your child may be a napper, they may not be a napper. It takes a little bit more digging into your family's routines and things like that. So it's not something I can necessarily answer right off the bat. But if they are into napping and they're just really inconsistent, try sticking to a routine first. If you're not sure what that routine should look like, we suggest starting with a wake up time, because that's the most easily controlled variable. So if you look at a set time, you notice, okay, we tend to wake up between 6 a.m. and 8 a.m. And you're like, for our family, it works better if they wake up at 7, than trying to get that wake time to be as consistently around 7 as possible. And then you can adjust nap times after that based on their tiredness cues. So being observant and noticing when they're starting to lose attention, lose focus, concentration, things like that, they're starting to get a little crabbier. Those are all indication that it's time for them to take a nap. Let's see. Keys to staying asleep. This is our Coda's, Ashley's other child, Merrick, sleeping away. Cannot emphasize it enough. Routine is probably the most important thing that you could do for helping your child get and stay asleep. The body needs to come to expect it, and then without even them realizing or you realizing it, the body is preparing them for sleep because of consistency. Going to sleep with the just right level of arousal This is why it's important to not just rush through a bedtime routine if you are late one night, because in the long run, your child's going to end up staying up later because they have too much energy, too much increased arousal from the day. Like we all know when we come home from shopping, or like we had a whole tournament day and we come home and go immediately to sleep, no matter how exhausted you are, it's hard for your body to shut down because we have to give it time to come back down from that high stimulation. It's not something that just happens in the blink of an eye. And sometimes kids need help with that. So staying there for those extra couple of minutes and providing that massage, providing that the cues for sleep would be really helpful. This is something that I found really interesting too, that I never really thought about, but it's helpful if the environment is the same as they're falling asleep as if they were to wake up in the middle of the night. So this means maybe not like laying down with them in bed while they're trying to fall asleep. Maybe you're sitting next to them with a body pillow in between you so that the body pillow is the thing that they become used to and it's not you. Having the light be the same. If your fan is on, have the fan be on the whole night. If what white noise machine is on, have the white noise machine being on all night so that when they wake up, it's as similar to when they felt safe falling asleep um, during the night, and having that consistency. That should just be the keyword of the whole presentation, consistency. Respecting the child's clock, making sure that you notice those indicators that they're ready for bed so that we're not missing that sleep window. And it puts everyone behind schedule if we miss the sleep window, and making the child feel safe. I think a lot of times parents get a lot of conflicting information whether or not to go to their child when the child is crying. They're like, oh, they should just soothe themselves. That's what everyone tells me. And honestly, that might work for some kiddos, but most kiddos need to know that you're there for them and that they are safe and calm. Something that's helpful could be to think, how would you react if this was during the day? If your child was crying and screaming for you because they were scared, would you just let them sit that like that? Maybe you would. Maybe they're doing it for an attention seeking purpose. But are they doing it because they're generally scared? You would go and comfort them. So it's important that we do it during night too, because sleep is so necessary for our lives. And they need to feel safe as they're falling asleep. If they're just screaming and they won't stop screaming, something that's suggested is actually leaving the room for a little bit so you don't start to the child doesn't start to associate screaming with the bedroom. And then once they've calmed down, once the arousal levels have gone down, going back and repeating the bedtime routine, which seems like it would be a lot of effort, but in the long run will help your child stay asleep. The abdominal sleep reflex. So this is a part of the programming that we do here at Kinetic Edge. It's called MNRI, Moscotova Neuromotor Reflex Integration. It's a mouthful. But this is a specific reflex that releases melatonin to the body and helps kids stay and fall asleep. I can't go into detail over this presentation for legal purposes, but if you guys are curious about what it does, you can always sign up for a free screen and we can give you some more information about it there. Speaking of free screen, here is the QR code that you could follow if you wanted to sign up for one. Here in Pella, Elise and I are the OTs that you might be seeing for a free screen, but we have clinics all around Iowa. So if there's one that works better for you, then you can go to a Kinetic Edge website and look up our clinic locations. Okay, then here's my contact information. This is recorded, as you guys could probably all see, but it'll be uploaded, I believe, to our YouTube channel, Kinetic Edge Physical Therapy YouTube page. So if you wanted to find it again, because I talk fast and I understand that I talk fast, you can go back and pause it when you need to. Or if you have any questions or concerns, you can always email me. I'm genuinely decent at responding to email. It might be within a couple of days, but I get back pretty quickly so I can help you through. And then here's our clinic phone number. Here are some of the resources I used. This is just a research article, and then this book was mind-blowing. It was very helpful. But I read it so that you don't have to, because it's kind of a lot. So don't feel like you need to read this book in order to become a sleep expert. I condensed all the information into this PowerPoint so you can take it from there. Okay, questions. I got to figure out how I can see people's questions, but if you have any, Go for it. There, I think I have it open now. So I think you can chat if you need to. If you feel more comfortable, feel free to email the questions. I always hated when professors are like, "Does anyone have any questions?" I'm like, "No, mine's embarrassing. I don't want to talk in front of everybody." So you don't have to worry about that. You can just email me if you want to. I'll give it a couple more minutes. I'm going to put it back on the screen for the free QR, free screen QR. That way you guys can use that if you want to. I'm going to mute myself, but I'll be here for a couple of minutes. If you do think of a question that, oh man, I thought it was going to be a question. I got so excited. Thank you. I'm not sure who said this, but I appreciate it. Jan, thanks, Jan. What was I gonna say? But if you guys have questions, you can just shoot me one. And I'll just kind of be hanging out here. I'll pull up the screen. Actually, I don't know if I can pull it up and have the chat be open. So I'll just hang out here. You can raise your hand on the presentation if you need something. Okay, I got a question. A 2-year-old keep a consistent routine, but she has been waking up around midnight and has been unconsolable. I think I read an email from you guys, and I've been thinking about this. Something we mentioned earlier. I feel like my first thought is protein levels. If her protein levels have been a good amount, because a lot of times kids will wake up because they're hungry. 2 years old is also during that developmental milestone I mentioned earlier. I don't know where she is in the 2-year-old throughout the year, but if you're even at like a 2.5-year-old time span, developmental milestones are happening now. So that could be an indicator as well. And this is the hard part about doing it over Zoom, because I would love to see like what your routine is and if there's like tweaks that we can make. Follow up, she's almost 3. That's probably also it, because 3-year-old is another milestone. So that could be the indicator right there. Unless she's been doing this for like a really long time. And then I would like to see what kind of routine that you guys have, and if there's something that we could adjust from there, which is the hard part of the online presentation. Is she, when she falls asleep at night, how long does it take her to get down? I take a drink. Okay, it says it takes her about an hour. Yeah, that's a decent amount of time. I think we could, if we started with that, then the amount of time that she stays asleep would also be adjusted. So we can chat later. I know this person, that's why I can say that. I wonder if I can see. All right, I'm gonna go on mute again. But if there's another question. Jan said, I'm gonna click on this and see. Oh, no, that's not what I wanted. Okay, Jan asked if there's any recommendations for a 9-year-old boy protein shake. Something that has like the least amount of carbohydrates with the higher amount of fat and protein would be preferred, because carbohydrates spike blood sugars and we don't want to spike them just for them to drop later. If I remember correctly, it's not Laughing Cow, Fairlife has relatively decently balanced macronutrients. I would check the labels on those. And Premier Protein, I think, does a pretty good job too. Elise always made protein smoothies, which I thought was a good idea. So just a little bit of fruit, some high protein milk like soy milk, a protein powder, maybe a little bit of honey if you need like to sweeten it up just a little bit. Don't put too much in because that has a lot of sugar in it. And then blend that up in a blender. That's what she used for her boys, she said. Does that answer the question, or do I need to get more specific? You could also put spinach in there because you can't really taste the spinach, and that's a good way to sneak in some greens in their diets. Okay, I answered Jan's question, but if someone else has a question about the protein shakes, go ahead and ask. Also, in case you're wondering, I have someone in here with me. I'm not talking to myself, so just want to point that out. I just got a question. What protein shake do you suggest for an 18-month-old child? Will be 2 in July. That's a great question. I have not thought, honestly, like younger than 3 years old. If you type in to this chat your email, I will do some research and get back to you on that. I don't want to give you an answer that I'm not 100% confident in. How old? Oh, the person who was with me conveniently looked up this fun one. It's Orgain Kids Protein. I don't know for an 18-month-old, but I think it kind of depends on how well they're tolerating foods and liquids at this point. But the Orgain Kids Protein, I'll pull up a picture because it's convenient. I'm not sponsored, but if they wanted to, that'd be cool. Looks like that. Something to try. Okay. Could I borrow your pen, Sydney? I will get back to you. If not today, then tomorrow. Pediatric also has what's it called? It looks like this. Sorry, my face was so bad when I did that. But I was also thinking, oh, Jan says hi. She says hi back. The something else that might be beneficial for an 18-month-old instead of a protein, but like a Danimals type thing where you're like drinking yogurt. I think Danimals has a high sugar content, so you might need to get like regular yogurt and then dilute it with some soy milk or something if there's no allergies. That might be more tolerable to the digestive system of an 18-month-old versus a protein shake that has a bunch of different ingredients. It might be kind of a lot to process. Depends on what normal diet is. I think I'll end the presentation here unless anyone has a last minute question. Um, Again, this will be on Connect Edge's YouTube page, I believe. If it's not on the YouTube page, I'll have our marketing person who's in charge of this send out an email about where it's going to be. But most likely it will be on the YouTube page under a title of Get to Sleep, Stay Asleep, something like that. All right, everybody, thank you for your questions. Thanks for attending. I hope everyone has a good day.